I've been playing video games longer than most YouTubers covering GTA 6 have actually been alive. I'm 55 years old. I've been playing video games since before they were just a few moving shapes on a screen. And I don't mean that in back in my day, we walked in the snow uphill to school both ways. I mean, I was literally there. I watched this entire industry get built from the ground up, from two joysticks and some marching pixels on a television screen to entire cities and worlds you can roam about in. So here's the thing that gets me. People act like gaming belongs to the young. Like there's some expiration date on a controller that nobody told me about. Like at some point you're supposed to put it down, buy a recliner, and sit back and watch other people play games on YouTube or on Twitch. So I didn't get that memo because some of us were playing games before the people saying that were actually born. Some of us were playing video games before even their parents were born. And some of us spent 14 years actually building the games that a whole generation grew up on. So no, gaming is not just for the young. And this is my story. And if you're an older gamer who's ever felt like you don't belong in the conversation, stick around because you absolutely do. So here's a quick rundown of who I am. My name is Chris Melke, and this is the Dev Chair. And the reason that this channel exists is that I spent 14 years on the production side in the game industry. I worked at Day One Studios, Epic Games, and Boss Key Productions. As a producer, I was a conductor that made sure all the trains ran on time, but had to deal with all the trade-offs to make sure the right train, or video game in those cases, made it to your store shelves and to your console. That's the lens that I bring to everything on this channel. There's no hype here. There's no reaction videos. It's the actual engineering and business underneath the games that you've come to know and love. And today we're doing something a little different. Today is personal. So, my first memory of video games didn't happen in a living room. It didn't happen in an arcade. It happened somewhere you'd never expect. My first video game experience was a portable one that I held in my hand. And it was Mattel Football 1, the first generation of portable video games, which my uncle gave to me on my birthday when I was 7 years old. I loved it so much that my dad bought me the LED version of Battlestar Galactica later that year. I played those games until the buttons wouldn't work anymore, and I knew every pattern that little LED contraption was going to throw at me. I loved having control over just that one football player and winning the entire game by yourself. But the key was that I was controlling the player, and the game wasn't doing that. For anyone who grew up with an iPad, that might sound completely silly. But you have to realize that in the mid-1970s, that was an amazing single-player experience. And that was only the prelude to the Atari 2600. So that was the moment that I started playing video games. But my parents didn't buy me an Atari 2600 when it was released. They thought it was an outrageously expensive machine for $199.95, and I thought it was a bargain. My dad said he wouldn't buy one until it was under 50 bucks. Little did he know he would actually regret that statement. And my little life went on playing simple LED games for several years. But my friend down the street went through a divorce, and for his second Christmas in 1979, he was given the magical Atari console. We played all those 7 launch titles and loved dueling each other in combat. Football was another favorite of ours and kept our little beady eyes fixed on that screen for hours. My games on those tiny LED screens were just gateway drugs to this experience. And now I was controlling an even bigger screen and playing my friend or a computer that was infinitely smarter than any of those silly LED computer games. But those games are only an appetizer for the mother of all arcade games that blew my mind. And Space Invaders was that game. As I said, we spent tons of hours playing football, but we dropped that like a hot potato and started spending every waking moment trying to beat Space Invaders. The game worked us over like nothing had ever before. We developed superhuman reflexes to make our way through the levels, if you can call them levels. Once you have cleared the wave of aliens in that obsessive game, the same group just ascended at a faster rate, and our thumbs and wrists were getting sprained and achy from just keeping up. People look at those early games and can't believe how simple they are. But those games could transport you to another planet where you were the hero that was going to stave off an alien invasion. And I love space. And Star Wars ruled my world from the time it came out in May of 1977. And then the TV show Battlestar Galactica filled the gap until The Empire Strikes Back came out in 1980. So the moment that Space Invaders, with those little pixelated aliens marching down the screen, came to my TV, I was in love. The two things I loved most in the world had just collided, and it was like peanut butter and chocolate. And they never really separated after that. My father was an electrical engineer, and my mother was a grade school teacher. But they unknowingly figured out that the world wasn't going to be ruled by gaming consoles, but by computers. Since my mom was a teacher, she got a significant discount on Apple products. Even though my brokey parents were against buying the family a $200 console, they sprung for a loan through Apple to get an Apple II Plus in 1981. The irony is somewhat rich, since my parents were willing to go into debt for a computer for several years, but not sink any money into a console they could have paid off in a few installment payments. Learning BASIC on the Apple II Plus was a chore for me, but having a computer gave me access to games. And my dad turned into a big gamer also. We frequented what is now the predecessor of GameStop, which was Electronics Boutique, which later became EB Games. We loved Babbage's and software, etc. I spent hours browsing in these stores like they were a library and reading all the backs of the game boxes. The computer felt like a genuine upgrade over the console for gaming, and every game that came out kept getting better and better. My favorite games in the early 80s were Castle Wolfenstein, Adventureland, and Lunar Lander, which was another journey into space. The Apple ecosystem was strange, since the games were knockoffs of popular arcade games just retitled with their own unique names. Pac-Man became Gobbler, and Missile Defense became Missile Command. Since my computer could only provide so much video game dopamine, it was supplemented by the rise of the video game arcades in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. They were just a long bike ride and some place to spend your lawn mowing money. My go-to games were Galaga, Centipede, and Defender. The Intellivision came and went in 1980, but I only knew of one person who had it all the way across town. Instead, I used that time to pedal my way up to the arcade. In my preteen years, I was also getting into Dungeons and Dragons, and that led into countless hours of playing Ultima 4, and I remember playing Wizardry, the Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, on New Year's Eve in 1981, while my parents and friends got drunk and counted down the seconds until 1982. And that meant, in that year, it was the arrival of ColecoVision. When ColecoVision came out with Donkey Kong in 1982, that showed me that you could have an arcade-quality game in your living room. But my parents had hitched their wagon to the Apple, so I coped with not having a console by playing Raster Blaster, one of the first pinball games, Sabotage, Choplifter, Frogger, and Miner 2049er. When I was in high school in 1986, Atari actually put the Atari 2600 on sale for $49.99. I showed the Sunday Circular ad from Service Merchandise that was taken from the newspaper, a newspaper, to my father, and we picked one up along with all the games that the kids were enjoying a decade earlier. Finally, 9 short years later, and the console was mine. We were still going to the arcade, but instead of riding our bikes, we were also driving in beater cars that were used for our high school jobs. The best memories of my high school years were standing in front of Spy Hunter, Gauntlet, Contra, Time Pilot, Bad Dudes, and probably the game that I pumped the most quarters into ever, Rolling Thunder. I went to college, and gaming didn't disappear during those years, but it wasn't as prevalent since there was so much other stuff going on with studying, girls, and partying. That's one of the funny things about something that's genuinely a part of who you are. It doesn't go away just because life gets loud. It just waits quietly until you come back to it. And I always came back to it. Then another gaming monster entered the room, and it was the PC. And everything changed again, except it didn't change what I was playing. It changed how deep into computers and PC gaming I was willing to go. I graduated with a degree in graphic design and used my mom's educator discount to buy a Mac Quadra 700 to start up a freelance graphic design business to supplement my 9-to-5 job. I paid that off and had a couple solid games like Prince of Persia, Myst, and eventually the seminal title for the Mac called Marathon. But before Marathon came out, I invested in a compact Presario PC. So, if you remember, PC gaming in the early 90s was a whole different relationship than just gaming. On a console, you could put the cartridge in it and it worked. On a PC, half the fun was getting the game to run. IRQ conflicts, sound card driver conflicts, expanded memory cards. You weren't just a player, you were an IT person. And somehow it made it more satisfying. I invested in that PC because I saw a game that blew me away. And that game was Doom. The way that game played was silky smooth, with the sound card blasting that ultimate soundtrack, it was like reliving a nerd's first kiss. That hooked me on shooters. I wanted more, and id was willing to supply the goods with Quake, Quake 2, and Quake 3 Arena. But then the upgrade cycle started. And if you were a PC gamer in the 90s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You'd buy a game, the game would run badly. Then you'd upgrade your RAM, then the next game would come out, and you need to have a better CPU. Then the 3D accelerator cards showed up, and suddenly you needed one of those too. It wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was a commitment, a lifestyle, and a very expensive lifestyle that your significant other may or may not have fully understood. You needed things to run faster to be at the top of the leaderboards when Quake 3 Arena came out. And also I got hooked on Blizzard franchises like Diablo, StarCraft, and Warcraft, and you needed those games to run fast. Every few years, games would make another jump. And every time you think, okay, the graphics can't possibly get better than this. But then of course they did, every single time. But here's where my story takes a turn that most gamer stories don't. Because at some point I stopped just playing games and I wanted to learn how to build them. So I started building them. There's a moment in every gamer's life where you actually wonder what's happening on the other side of the screen. And I got to find out. With that knowledge, it changed how I see every game I've ever played since. So again, to recap, I spent 14 years in games with studios like Day One Studios, Epic Games, and Boss Key Productions. I started off as a lowly content manager for Day One Studios, where I proofed the assets the artists were building and made sure they were good enough to import into the game, which was MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf. I was finally on the inside and learning how games are built. The hours are long, the staff was passionate about the game, and you figured out how to deal with the limitations of the Xbox 360 console, which was now a part of my console collection. When MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf was released, I was pretty proud of it. But then when you got into the forums, you realized how brutal fans could be if you didn't realize their vision for the game or the sequel to MechAssault. After working as a lead producer for a year, I was then promoted to an associate producer in charge of porting a hit called F.E.A.R to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Working on that port with Monolith, which was the studio that built F.E.A.R, was interesting. They gave you the assets, and our studio tried to make it as close to the PC as possible, with a constrained environment. We developed some DLC that was in the same vein, but was never as good as the original game. That game was something special, since it was my first experience working with dev kits, and I worked with the original dev kit for the PS3. Those machines weighed 100 pounds or more, and their fans, from what I remember, were as loud as hell. I also worked a bit on a game called Fracture, which was a Day One Studios title and published under LucasArts, but if you weren't with the studio when the game shipped in 2008, you didn't get credit. And I didn't get credit, unfortunately, because I left in 2007 and worked on several titles for Epic Games as their art production manager. It may have been a step back, but I played Gears of War on the Xbox 360, and after Quake and F.E.A.R, I knew I wanted to keep developing shooters. I sat with the artists and animators on Gears 2 and eventually moved to the office where the associate producer and I shared space. I learned what producing a blockbuster title actually entailed. I was sitting in production meetings where decisions that affected the games got made, where engineers argued about what was possible, artists argued about getting the best visual fidelity, and where designers fought for features and watched them get cut. I saw where the gap between what a game could be and what actually got shipped as a part of my daily production tasks at Epic. So here's what working in games teaches you can't learn any other way. Every single thing you see on a screen, every animation, every reflection, every NPC walking down the street, somebody made a decision about that. Somebody actually argued for it. Someone fought to keep that in. And probably some producer tried to cut it because the frame rate tanked in testing and you were running out of time. Building games is like haggling at the car dealer for 2 or 3 long years to finally get all the features, graphic goodness, and performance into a digital download or a box that sits on someone's shelf. I left Epic when the lead designer from the Gears of War series started his own studio. Epic was heavily invested in developing Fortnite, and it didn't have a first-person shooter mode when I was helping on that game, and working on Paragon. But I wanted to build shooters, and the option was to move to Canada to help Microsoft and the Coalition build Gears of War 4, or join Boss Key Productions to build LawBreakers. I chose to stay in North Carolina and develop LawBreakers. And here's the strange thing that happens when you work in games. You actually never quite play them the same way again. You start noticing the rough parts in them, the places where a decision got made, and the spot where you can tell something got cut in the last 3 months of development. You can see where the patient has been stitched up and shipped off because a producer said, will not fix in Jira, or design said, not a bug. But you can also see the craft. And the craft, when it's done right, is genuinely extraordinary. The amount of human effort that goes into making a world feel alive is something most players will never fully appreciate. And that's okay. That's actually the goal. The best work in game development is the work you'd never consciously notice. When I watched influencers play LawBreakers before it was released, I felt immense pride in what our tiny studio had built. We put out a game that ran at dizzying speeds and had fluid controls. I felt proud of our team that had shipped that game in under 3 years with a skeleton staff while battling the publisher the entire way. After 14 years of all those battles, I stepped back from the industry to build other companies. But I really never stepped back from games. I had all the latest gaming consoles, but I craved portability. So I was mostly a Hearthstone addict on an iPad until giving it up this year. I've gotten to Legend several times, but the cost of obtaining the cards and the packs seemed out of control. And then I saw that Rockstar announced that GTA would finally ship on November 19th of this year. And something clicked within me that I didn't expect. I want to tell you why GTA 6 isn't just another game I'm covering on this channel. Because for someone with my history, when I saw this announced that it was shipping this year, it made me want to get back into the game, so to speak, but in another way. I've played all the Grand Theft Auto series from GTA 3, all the DLC, and even Chinatown Wars for the PSP. I played the Red Dead Redemption series, the Max Payne series after Bullet Time was brought from the Matrix movies to video games and gave us one of the coolest game mechanics ever. Now Rockstar is willing to put it all on the line again and take everything they have learned from their past games and put it into this game that comes out in less than 4 months. Rockstar is building a world that isn't just a simulation. They're building a world that we can live in and experience for over a decade or more with online play and DLC. And for what you think about Rockstar, whatever you think about the wait or the timeline that they've been on, Rockstar has been building this thing for over a decade with a level of obsession that I recognize because I've seen what that obsession looks like from the inside. But here's the part that's harder to explain than just some technical mumbo jumbo. GTA 6 is the latest chapter in a story that started for me with Space Invaders, with all those little pixelated aliens marching down a screen, with the feeling controlling something on a television for the first time, with Doom barely running on a machine that couldn't handle it, with games like GTA, Fallout, and Elder Scrolls that allowed me to explore every nook and cranny in a strange city or fantasy world. It's all the same thread. It all has the same pull. It's the same thing I've been chasing since I was a kid. Games that take you somewhere. Games that make you feel like you're in another world, even when you're sitting in a chair in your living room or at a desk playing on a PC. GTA 6 looks like it's possibly going to be the apex predator of video games. And after 55 years of living and 14 years of building, I want to see how badass it actually is. So why do I still play video games? thought about this a lot because people do ask. Sometimes they're genuinely curious, and sometimes you get that question with a little edge in their voice. So you still play games at your age? And the honest answer is I've never really stopped. Games were there when I was a kid, seeing something on a screen respond to me for the first time. They were there through consoles and cartridges and shareware and CD-ROMs. They were there through graphics cards and CPU upgrades and games that barely ran on a machine that I owned and paid a lot of money for. They were there through 14 years of building them from the inside, and they're still here now. There was a reason why the game Myst was so successful and powerful. You solved puzzles and were transported to a world that only exists in fiction. But you were able to step through that screen and live another life. I don't play because I'm trying to stay young. I play because this has been a part of my life since I was young. There's a difference, a real difference. And when someone in a YouTube channel comments, say they feel old because they've waited so long for the new GTA, I don't correct them. I just smile because they have no idea what's waiting for them on the other side of the next 30 years of games. It only gets better. GTA 6 comes out on November 19th, God willing, without any delay. And I think I've been waiting for this game my whole life. I just didn't know it yet when I was sitting on my friend's couch in his basement watching him play Space Invaders for the first time. I'll be there on day one, and I'll probably be the oldest person in the online lobby if they introduce that on day one. But I'll definitely be the one who knows how the sausage gets made and what it took to bring that game to your screen. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So here's what I want to know, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, so drop this in the comments. How old are you? And what was the first video game that you remember playing? I want to find my people, the older gamers, the ones who were there before it was cool, before it was a booming industry, and before it became a part of our culture. The ones who have been there the whole time. Let me know you're out there because I know I'm not the only one. If this video struck a chord within you, please subscribe. This channel is for people who want to understand games and not just play them. They want to understand the engineering, the business, the history, and yeah, probably some personal stuff might hit this channel too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.